Oh, hi. Welcome to Wazoo Studios. This is actually my working studio where I create pottery. And actually, I'm kind of working on a mug right now, just kind of, working on fixing it up. This happens to be a teacup that I used just some underglaze and through centrifugal force and a little bit of needlework, I was able to acquire that splash look, which I think is going to be kind of cool when it gets glazed. So, what we're going to be doing actually today, let me put this back. See from some of my objects here that they're in the drying phase. This is called greenware, and greenware is anything that is taken off of the bat from clay, and it is now in the drying phase, and it will soon go to the kiln where it will be bisqued. Pause. I'm going to get off my chair now, so take a look at some of my work that I've actually done lately, and some of these things will be in my store, which is wazooceramicsandmore.com, on the internet. And when you get through looking at some of the pieces that I have, come on back to the wheel, and what we're going to be doing is talking about how to center your clay. Okay, so we're back, and I've taken my clay. By the way, this is clay that I get from Rocky Mountain Clay Company. This is called Dover, and it is a wonderful clay for hand building as well as throwing. I've cut off my section using my wire cutters, and it's very important to weigh things. When I was in the studio working with certain potters, they would give us certain amounts of clay, and you had to come up with, let's say, a cylinder that had to actually reach 6 inches tall. And sometimes that was difficult, but that's why they would weigh them. And I have a scale here, so I'm just going to weigh this piece. And I like to work with pieces that are just about 2 pounds. All right, and before my hands get really dirty, I am going to cut another piece, because sometimes, as my former instructor would say, the wheel was not being good to me. And so I'm going to take a look at that, and I'm going to weigh that. I've gotten pretty decent at figuring out how much to cut, which is going to give me about 2 pounds. And then if I wanted to do 1 pound, I would just slice that in half. Okay, so I've got that piece of clay that weighs 2 pounds. What's important to do with clay, even though this looks really solid, and people sometimes will go ahead and start throwing with this. No, you want to make sure that your clay is worked. And so we call this wedging. When you take your hands, pretend that you are, if you're a baker, you would do this naturally with dough. So I'm going to make this more malleable and easier to handle. A lot of people that have difficulty throwing and centering their clay, one of the reasons is that the clay is not worked well enough. And so I'm going to just center that, and I'll be right back with you when I form my ball. And we're back, and I just put on my apron. So definitely, I don't work with a lot of water, but a lot of people do. And if you want to protect your clothes to some degree, you'll want to get your apron. So I'm going to have a seat right here, back at my station. And you'll notice I have two balls of clay, each about 2 pounds. And the reason why I got 2 is because if one fails, I don't have to get my hands clean, go back and cut another slice. I've got something right ready to put on the wheel and get going. What's important to have is always have clean water when you're first starting, which I do. You'll see in my tray here, this is slip. So if I'm making something and I need to have that slip, this is the leftover clay that you'll see as I'm using the clay that I'll be putting into this little container, and I'll probably get another one. It's important to have all your tools kind of real here and handy, excuse me, so that you don't have to do a lot of fumbling around and figuring out where you put things. So on this particular shelf, and it's not the best, it's not real neat, but I have my carving tools, I have pin tools, I have brushes, and then I have other things that I am using throughout my time. So, are we ready to get started? All right. I am going to, here's my bat, it's on the wheel. By the way, this is a speedball, it's called Artisan, and this whole thing is portable, so that when the good weather comes, I don't have to be confined inside with my throwing wheel. And it's kind of nice actually to be outside and in the early summer mornings and throwing pottery and listening to the birds sing and just really being out with nature. So back to what we're going to be talking about, and it's centering. Centering is the center of all pottery. If you don't have a centered piece, your pottery will be wobbly. It will be inconsistent as far as the walls are concerned. We'll talk about that in a minute. And what that leads to is cracking. And you don't want to have to go through all of the process of putting your pottery on the wheel, the clay on the wheel, and bringing it up and all of that just to have it crack. And when it cracks, you've just lost your piece. So to get started, we're going to turn the wheel on. Okay. And I'm just going to make sure I have just a little bit of dampness. And then I'm going to throw my piece together. Make sure it's good and stuck, and it is. Because there's nothing like having your piece of clay fly off your bat. Alrighty. So we're ready to get started. That's good and centered on there. I mean, as far as it's not falling off. At high speed, I'm just going to get the clay wet. Introduce the clay to my hands, if you will. That's the first step. Okay, get it nice and moist. You can see how that clay is moving. It's like a rodeo. My hand is on the clay, but look how much that clay is moving. That's what we don't want. We want to make sure that this clay is not moving. Techniques, people have a lot of different techniques. And when I learned from 3 different potters, all 3 potters had different techniques. I'm going to show you one that works for me. Obviously, you find what works for you, and the main thing is that you got a piece of centered clay. So, a lot of people make a mistake and they think that they're going to put their hands on the clay and make sure it's centered all at once. That is not true. That's fallacy. With your hands good and wet, I'm going to take first off so it wobbles less. Now you can see that's starting to form. Again. That's number 2. Look, it's less wobbly. You can see my hands are not moving as much. Number 3 time, I'm going to just push into the clay and bring it up a little bit. This is called coning. When we bring it up and we bring it down. Coning is important, first off, because it introduces water to the clay. And you don't want to have too much, obviously. But you do need some water in the clay to reestablish it and make it a little bit more easy to work. This one obviously needs a little bit of water. But you'll notice how I'm coning up and I'm introducing that water to the clay, which it probably had evaporated from the package. So I'm going to take that piece with my hand, this hand. This is the steady hand. So I'm going to cone down. And I'm going to pause it for a minute so that we can change the camera angle. Okay, so with this left hand, I'm going to kind of use that to guide my clay. You can see most of the clay is moving down here. All right? And sometimes I just take my finger and push against that one part. But I'm going to guide, and I'm going to push back down. When I'm pushing down, I'm also pushing a little bit forward. My idea is really to form almost a big gumdrop. And you don't need a lot of force. You let the clay work itself. The clay will do what you want it to do if you're not too forceful. Now you'll notice, look how the clay is moving. It's almost nearly centered. I'm going to clean up around the edge here just a little and get that slip up and around the clay. All right. Watering, make sure you always keep your hands. This is what you want your hands to look like. Nice and slippery. This is the slip, as it's called. Maybe that's where they get the word slippery from. Slippery slip. So I'm going to go back to the piece of clay, and still moving a little bit much. You can see my hands moving just a little bit. So, and I like this part. Actually, it's one of my favorite parts. Taking my hands and feeling that clay move up into a cone. As I go up, I'm going to put a little bit more water in. I'm introducing water into the clay. And I can see from that, and this is what I'm getting out of the clay as I work, which is actually the centering of the clay. This is stuff that probably was moving around in that rodeo fashion. So I'm just going to put that in the container for later on and push this back down. If you notice, I'm using the palm of my hands, pushing it down, and I'm using this hand to steady, making sure everything is well lubricated. A lot of people make a mistake and they're putting way too much water, and what you're going to end up with is clay that has too much water and it's too sticky, ending in a mess. So as I'm working this back down, I'm guiding it with my left hand and getting it ready to be perfectly centered. It's all a process. And one of the things that I like about this is that, and I had an instructor that told me you should sometimes just close your eyes, put your hands around. Now my hands are steady, as you can see. The wheel's moving around, but my hands are pretty steady, meaning that the clay is perfectly centered. Now I'm ready to open it up. I'm going to clean off my bat, and you'll see from here there really wasn't a lot of water thrown. A lot of people end up with too much water in the well, and what they're ending up with is weaker clay bodies, and the clay is just going to fall apart. So I kind of get that slip off my hands, and I'm ready to open. Notice how nice and smooth that is. It feels like butter. So with this hand, I'm going to guide it. And then I'm going to do what they call an opening. This shows you that it's perfectly centered. I always use my hands to steady the other hand. So I'm going down like a drill. And it's just really a matter of practice. You want to stay about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom, so you don't end up with a hole in the bottom. Now if you notice, and the camera is showing this, that wheel, that hole is perfect. It's not moving at all. So from here, we put a little water in the hole, so everything is nice and moist. Again, using your left hand as your guide, I'm going to pull straight out with my knuckles, creating a wall. And this is the beginning. We start with a floor, which is on the bottom, making sure that's all good and compressed. Okay, I'm going to slow the wheel down just a little bit. And then we're going to begin forming our cylinder. You'll notice that the bulk of the clay is right through here. And we still haven't formed a wall yet. So what I'm going to do is with my sponge, I'm going to put that on the inside here, use my other hand, and we're going to open up that wall. Okay. I want to form a cylinder. Right now it kind of looks like a pot, but that's not the objective. If my camera person takes a look at the actually inside of that pot, it's almost like the hypnotic wheel that turns and puts you to sleep. So it reminds me kind of the Twilight Zone. But that's what you're looking for. Alright, so I'm going to get this going into more of a cylinder. So as I do that, I pinch on the bottom with my right hand, and my sponge, and I see that this is some clay that I was able to get out from that center, which also keeps it more centered. And I'm going to do it again. So with one hand to guide, which is the left hand, and I'm using this finger pressed against this sponge on the outside to give me moisture, I'm raising the walls. So now you see the beginning of a cylinder. So I'm going to do that again, right from the bottom. And you'll notice my hand on this side is going to down there, pulling that up. So I'm going to slow that down just a little bit. And here we go. Watch the wall go up. There's a little bit of clay that came off. And I really have got more of a flange on the top. And I'm going to show you how to use a technique what we call collaring and bring it back into a cylinder. And now we're back to cylinder form, which I'm going to also bring up a little bit more. Pottery is an exercise in patience. And if you haven't got that peace of mind, you're probably not going to throw good pottery. I come out here and it's almost like me being in a meditative state. I've taken a lump of clay and I fashioned something out of that. It's really, I think it's like a work of art. I'm going to try to pull this up one more time. Until you see the walls. That wall is about 1/4 inch thick. And maybe that's where I want to stay. But this is still a cylinder. Keep in mind, from the cylinder you can do anything you want. If you want this to be a pot, and by the way, when I use my fingers, I use these two with equal pressure, bringing the heavy part, the thick part of the clay up, 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 up slowly until I get to the rim. You can tell from this is perfectly centered. And then it's from here that we decide what we want to do with it. If I want to make this into a traditional flower pot, what I'm going to start to do is use my rib tool. Get it good and wet. It's a rib tool. And I'm going to apply it. Now notice where I'm applying the rib tool. It's never on this side because this is where the clay is coming and it's going to make my rib tool rock. I'm going to put it on this side where the clay is going. Okay, it's going away from me and therefore it's going to work with me a lot better. As I apply pressure, gentle, from the top, I'm going to open that up even more. So what I'm doing actually is stretching the clay. Notice the effect I've got now. I've got more of a bowl going on. If I go down further, which I'm going to, with my rib tool, I'm going down right down into that area. And I'm bringing it up. And clay is pretty elastic. It almost has a memory. So it'll come right back. Even though you kind of put it out of shape. Like if I'm doing this with my hand, notice that it's out of shape. But the minute I take my hand off, it goes back into the way it wants to go, the way it's supposed to go. So I'm going to remove a little bit of water from there. And depending on how you want your bowl to look, I want mine to come out a little bit more maybe. So I'm going to take my rib tool and I'm going to take my sponge with equal amounts of pressure, pushing that. It's getting a little wobbly. But I'm going to straighten that out. I'm going to turn the speed down. So my rib is on this inside and my sponge is on the outside with equal amounts of pressure. And I'm going to get that back into shape. So now, taking this, the straight side with the sponge on this side, I'm going to straighten it all up. And we're back to pretty much the form of the bowl that we had before, and it's not so wobbly. We could leave it like that if we wanted to. Also, don't forget that when you're throwing your pieces, as much as you can smooth with your sponge, it's going to be a lot easier than when it's dry and it's sharp. People don't realize that when you're actually putting glaze on, you're actually putting powdered glass on your piece. That's what makes it shiny, if you have a certain shine to it. I'm going to make this a little bit. I'm going to flange the lip on this just a little. With my fingers, I'm going to pinch outward And if I monkey with it anymore, it's going to get right out of shape. So pretty much we went from a lump of clay to a decent sized bowl. When this shrinks, it'll be almost a little bit bigger than a cereal bowl. So in those 25 minutes that we were talking, I took this, which was exactly the same amount of weight, just 2 pounds of clay, and I was able to form a nice bowl. You can do it too. It just takes a lot of time, it takes a little bit of patience, but most of all, it takes a lot of practice. So get on that wheel, don't be afraid, and don't let that clay be your master. You be the master of the clay. Till the next time, this is the Wazoo Ceramics studio, and I'm the maestro, so I'll be talking to you again. Bye now.